3, which is on ARM 95. Representatives of MGO are here today with us, Mr. Rick Green, partner, and also Debbie Chan, who is a senior with the firm and was on site conducting the review. Would like to share the results with the committee.
Welcome. Thank you.
Very good. Well, good morning. I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present the results of our work. And I'd also like to thank management and staff for your assistance and hospitality during the course of performing our work. We were engaged to perform an internal audit of CalSTR's global equity investment portfolio for the period of January 1st, 2015 through December 31st, 2015. Now, the objective of that work was to determine whether or not the internal controls were designed and operating effectively to minimize operational, compliance, accounting, and reporting risks that was inherent in the life of trade process associated with the internal managed accounts. Now, in addition to that, we also performed an assessment of risk and internal controls over the external management selection process, as well as monitoring process associated with the external managed accounts. We performed our work in accordance with the consulting services standards promulgated by the AICPA. And I'd like to now turn the presentation over to Debbie Chan, our director, who will talk about the methodology for achieving the objectives I just stated, and then ultimately the results of our work based upon the procedures performed. So, Debbie?
Thanks, Rick. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Our audit approach started with a risk assessment. We completed a comprehensive risk assessment and identified mitigating controls relating to the areas that Rick mentioned in the operational, compliance, accounting, and reporting processes. As part of completing the risk assessment, we review investment policies, guidelines, and internal control documents, as well as meeting with key managements to obtain additional information and to clarify our understanding of the global equity investment program. Based on the result of our risk assessments and the identification of mitigating internal controls, we developed an audit plan to determine the sufficiencies and the effectiveness of internal controls over those key processes. The risk assessment and the audit plans was reviewed by appropriate staff within the Office of Audit Services prior to us conducting those procedures. The result of our work reveals that, in general, the internal controls that we identified and tested are operating as designed. We do have one observation for improvement, which relating to the accounting process of the life of trade cycle. Our observation pertains to reconciliation between external managers and the custodian bank's record. The external managers are required to reconcile CalSTR's accounts to the custodian bank's records on a monthly basis. We noted three items in this process. First is the inconsistency between the documented procedures and the actual oversight procedures performed by CalSTR staff. We also noticed inconsistency in the information or data basically provide blank reconciliations. However, CalSTR's current oversight procedures do not include additional follow-up to substantiate those blank reconciliations. Management agreed with our observation and recommendation and has updated their procedures to address the recommendations with a target completion date of the end of this month. This concludes our presentations, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions? I don't don't see any. Larry, Bob, anything?
No, we'll continue to work with management and follow up on these items and report back to the committee on the status of implementation of those recommendations. I'd like to thank MGO for their good work here and appreciate their presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also, KPMG LLP completed an audit of information technology infrastructure, and that report is included as attachment 4 of your agenda item, which is on ARM 105. And there's representatives of KPMG here today to present that report, and I'd like to introduce them as they're coming forward. Mr. Matthew Snyder, who's a principal with the firm, Bassam Qasim, who's a director, and also Eddie Sesson, who is a manager. Hello.
Good morning. Welcome.
So thank you for the opportunity to present our results, and appreciation to the staff for their interaction. I'm joined here today by 2 members of our team for the IT infrastructure assessment. What's on the screen we'll follow up on in a little bit on the QAR. Bassam Qasim, our director on the engagement, and Eddie Sesson, our manager. But before we get to the details, I was asked to share just a few high-level points around KPMG and who we are. We're a global firm. I think you may know that, or those that are familiar with the accounting industry, of course. 174,000 people, 155 offices, and so on, across the U.S. with, tens of thousands as well. But more relevant are 2,300 internal audit specialists in the U.S. Leveraging those experiences and bringing those to bear here to perform assessments. For the IT infrastructure assessment, our approach, is to conduct interviews with the key stakeholders to review the processes, the documentation, the policies. And through that process, our results and additional detail around specifics will be shared here by my team members. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bassam.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for the introduction. IT infrastructure is basically the underlying foundational layer of support for IT processes and within the organization. While foundational, infrastructure has been almost pushed to the background of consciousness of many organizations. A lot of people take for granted that computers are going to work when you turn them on, that they're going to have the right speed, that they have the right capacity, that they're going to be able to meet all of your computer needs. That doesn't actually happen without a lot of effort and a lot of planning on the side of an IT organizations. Infrastructure and its associated risks have come to the foreground of a lot of organizations' thinking and internal audits because of a lot of the complexity that our modern day use of technology now has. You have a lot of demands of information. It's supposed to be available almost all the time, sooner, and everywhere. People expect it on various different devices, in different locations. All of that means that you're going to have higher capacity, more demands on your infrastructure, and more demands for upkeep. In this context, in the context of our audit, infrastructure refers to the physical and virtual servers, desktops, laptops, Surface Pros, and other devices such as pads and smartphones that are used by the organization and are networked, and the informational resources that are available in your network are available on these devices. So all of that constitutes what we consider to be IT infrastructure. One thing we did want to note is that mainframes, while normally a part of IT infrastructure, are not part of the review that we conducted, because it was subject to another review. So to avoid duplication, mainframes were not included in our review. Our review focused on fundamental elements of how you would manage an infrastructure. The scope of our work is available on ARM 106 if you care to leaf over to that section of our report. But just as a way of kind of introduction, our scope included the following. Governance, which is basically the policy and procedures that you have to guide individuals as to how to manage and plan for infrastructure, the planning processes for infrastructure itself, the availability of the system and its resources, and what would you do when it's not available, basically your disaster recovery and business continuity planning. Performance monitoring, making sure that the infrastructure meets the demand. Computer operations, basically the processes that you have for deploying, configuring, upgrading, and actually removing assets from your infrastructure environment. Inventory, tracking, of course, of your assets. And configuration management, which basically, as the name implies, means making sure that the systems are configured in a way to be able to meet the requirements, both from a compliance and from a regulatory standpoint, in addition to operational needs. The reason that IT infrastructure is important is just like we talked about. It's kind of the backbone of your daily operations that are conducted. If you take them for granted, but when they don't work, they actually become a much bigger deal. They have an impact on your ability to process information and also your reputation, because people assume that they're going to be working all the time. Our review utilized various different guidances, including some that you might be familiar with, such as the Control Objectives for IT, or COBIT, California Statewide Information Management Manual, the California Statewide Administration Manual, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. I'll turn it over now to my colleague, Eddie Cison, to talk a little bit about the individual findings that we had.
Thank you, Bassam. So I'm Eddie Cison. I was the manager on the project. So wanted to give you guys a little back or context around our findings in the report. So first of all, it's not unusual to have findings or observations in these reviews. And CalSTRS is no different, especially if you look at, when it's a more defined scope and you could go into deeper dives. So in many of our cases, when we brought our observations to management, they were in some cases already aware of some of the observations. For example, when we looked at the business continuity disaster recovery program, we noted that they had a business impact analysis done, and that BIA basically had some risks identified. Well, management was already aware of those risks. We're making efforts to fix those risks. Some of the other observations I wanted to touch point real quick was, again, related to disaster recovery. Because we looked into a deeper dive, when we looked at their disaster recovery program, or plan, I should say, it was a well-written plan. It had very extreme, scenarios, such as, hey, what do we do when the building's down? But as we reviewed it, we noticed that it didn't have certain scenarios that were less severe. So, for example, what happens if one floor is down, or if we can't get in touch with one individual that has a big impact? And so we brought those, again, issues to management. Again, they're very receptive of it, and they are looking at ways to enhance their plan. Another one I wanted to bring up was the storage area network, and really that it was at almost full capacity. So again, their production and disaster recovery SAN. The risk is that data may not be backed up or may not be available when needed, as Bassam mentioned. Everybody expects it always to be available, but when your SAN's up or at full capacity, there's that chance that it may not be available. And there's also a chance that data may not be backed up. So management, again, was aware of it. We talked to them. They've come up with ways to fix this. They have a short-term plan and a longer-term plan. Overall, our findings are pretty typical that we see throughout the different organizations. So, we didn't see anything that was serious concerns about, the ability to process information or support the current processes. Did anybody have any questions?
I was going to have a question until your last statement, which was going to be my question. So thank you for anticipating that. Harry.
Thanks. I don't have really a great reference to really process all this information. I mean, a lot of this is these are new terms and new ideas, but would be helpful to me in just thinking about this important topic that you raised and that we're looking at is how would we stack up against, and I'm a simple guy. So, like on a grading scale, and I'm a teacher, so how would we stack up against other like systems, apples to apples, this type of infrastructure, risk profile, how we're doing? Are we top of the class? Are we somewhere below an A but we're moving in the right direction? I mean, how do I really process all of this relative to other organizations?
Well, if I may speak, there's a couple of ways of looking at it. One is, like you described, is how do we stack compared to other organizations in terms of how our infrastructure works and our availability and disaster planning and all of that stuff. And in that case, just like Eddie mentioned, the observations that we have are not atypical. They look pretty much similar to what we've seen other organizations struggle with when it comes to making sure that you have a comprehensive plan, be able to kind of work through it, some of the capacity issues that you have, not atypical at all. But on the other hand, when you're thinking about what do we need in order to make sure that we don't end up with any issues, we kind of looked at what are the leading practices, and that's what we judged the organization on. We said, here are some things that you need to consider in order to make sure that you avoid some of the pitfalls that some other organizations would have. So to answer your question, you're not that different from organizations like size that aren't in a like you're not a bank, for example. So there are certain different requirements that a financial institution such as a bank would have compared to some of the work that you guys would have in that context. But there's certainly some room for improvement.
Thanks. And Mr. Chairman, I just have a question
Yeah,
for
keep-
our consultant as well.
Yes.
Dr. Yetman, are there suggestions or thoughts that you may have to the committee that actions that we can make that are, or suggestions that are actionable so that we can continue to make improvements in this area?
Thank you, Mr. Keeling. So an infrastructure audit on information technology is fairly new to the board, so a lot of these terms are new. New to me, right? I'm an old guy. So when having a discussion with the CFO, when typewriters came out with that correction ribbon, that was technology. But to your point, this really is a challenging area for any organization. There's rapidly increasing complexity. There's rampant legacy issues. And there's a tendency on the part of those of us using technology to ask those in the technology area to just make it work. And so that puts pressures on all technology infrastructure areas. And so the question is, when you get an audit finding, what does the board do with it? And does the board say, oh my gosh, the roof's on fire? Or, well, that sounds like a best practice that we need to institute. And so you asked the right question, which I was going to ask, which was, can you give the board some sense of, is this a red light or an orange light or a yellow light? Mm-hmm. And so can you do that for us? Can you say red light, orange light, yellow light? Because my interpretation is I see a lot of rooms for improvement, mm-hmm. but I don't see anything that tells me the roof's on fire. But I'd like to hear that from.
That's actually correct. That's kind of the impression that we wanted to make sure to give context in our findings, that there's nothing that we saw that you're going to worry about the lights going out tomorrow or that the computers are going to be down in the short term. We certainly found some things in our findings, and management was reacting to it to make sure that, at least in the short term, for some of the capacity issues that we found are being addressed. So in the report, we saw, okay, your capacity is at 92%. That may present a risk. They worked on it even during our our time on site was down to 85%, and they're probably kind of increasing capacity as we're speaking now. But the reason that we highlighted both disaster recovery and capacity planning is because they are going to take a longer period of time for management to be able to plan ahead and be able to minimize the risks that we identified. So short term, nothing that we see. I think for the long term, you would need to build some of these capacities, some of these processes in order to avoid some of the risks and findings that we had.
So I just want to add, we did a BCP a couple of years back, and we got the dollar to refresh our end of life, end of support infrastructure. So that is already going through, and we are getting like $2.2 million kind of every year for next 5 years. So we are prioritizing our infrastructure needs and upgrading that. As well as in this initiative, we are doing a roadmap, IT roadmap. So they are preparing for that. So maybe if we have that one, then I think we'll be very clear that what is needed quickly.
The IT roadmap, has the committee seen that?
No. You didn't see, I think they're developing right now for
Okay.
whatever the findings and how we will.
Okay, yeah, at some point we will.
Yeah, our agreement, the way that we designed our agreement with KPMG was first phase was to conduct the audit, find out if there's any significant issues. Second phase was develop a roadmap where we can look at opportunities to mature some of these processes within the organization. That's forthcoming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, in the report, we heard the findings, we heard management's response to the findings. Can you give us some commentary on management's response? Do you think they are appropriate, or do you take issue with any of the responses that management came up with?
We thought they were fair. If we had seen something within the management response that we thought needed additional clarification, we actually talked about it before it went into the report itself and the report was issued. So it wasn't just here's our findings, stick in your wording and issue the report. We did actually go a little bit back and forth on it to make sure that we're all comfortable with the level of detail and the fact that it addressed the issues that we highlighted.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the work on that. So now we go to the next item on the agenda, which is the item 8, the Audit Services External Quality Assessment Review.
Right, so I'm joined by Jill Sylvester. She's our director that drove and led this engagement, the field work. Every 5 years, the IIA, or the Institute of Internal Auditors, requires and recommends a quality assurance review of your internal audit function. That's what we performed. The last one you did, I believe, was in 2011. We looked at not only your conformance to IIA's requirements or standards, but we went beyond that and we looked at your performance relative to leading practices as well. The process that we went through included stakeholder interviews, documentation review, process understanding. It was fairly extensive. It took quite a bit of time. We did 12 interviews with your staff, and everybody was very open and forthcoming with information. It was very informative, and it helped inform a fairly robust summary report that we provided. In conclusion on that, you conform. We concluded that you conform to the IIA's standards and their requirements. Our observations are relevant to the leading practices, right? And observations, opportunities where you could focus some energy. And Jill is going to take us through that area.
Sure. And I think we have some slides, or is this just the cover for that? There we go. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. As Matt just mentioned, again, We're going to discuss the results in really two categories. And the first are areas of conformity with the internal audit standards. But really the other area we want to spend our time with is on recommendations for improvement around audit services, and particularly around internal audits. Many of the comments are focused on internal audits versus the employer audits, and opportunities to improve those. Maybe a little context too. When we conducted our stakeholder interviews and our review of audit documentation, we asked questions around the categories around the positioning or the governance around audit services and internal audits, around people, and also around processes. And so really the items you see above are the key strengths and opportunities that we observed. Just to talk through some of these. Again, what came through was very apparent and consistent in both our review and our discussions with executive leadership were around the role of governance and the importance that CalSTRS views around audit services. There was a very strong understanding of the purpose and importance of internal audit and providing support and transparency during the performance of internal audits. Also, that also includes how audit services is positioned in terms of independence and has a direct reporting line to you. Around leadership, we also heard from many interview participants that one of the key strengths of audit services is that the chief audit executive came to CalSTRS with significant experience within the industry, and that has helped provide, in particularly, a balanced and a good perspective when it comes to findings and how those relate in context of the industry. It's also noted the productivity around audit services has significantly increased from prior years in terms of the number of audits and that the department has completed and the ability of the department to meet the annual objectives of the plan. A couple comments around audit reporting. There were significant improvements that were noted and appreciated in terms of how the internal audit reports are provided to leadership and the board in terms of types of information and the format. And also around risk assessment, and this even extends, outside audit services to include some of the processes around the enterprise risk assessment process, and then how audit services has aligned their audit plan with the risk assessment. And that was noted as a key strength, really, by everyone we interviewed. In terms of key opportunities, and I want to put this into context too, while we have an overall opinion of conformity with the IA standards are very much an objective set of criteria that internal audit functions meet in terms of types of activities that they perform, their underlying policies and procedures and documentation requirements. They also include comments around making sure that internal audit personnel have the right level of education, and that there's clear requirements that are documented around that. One reason that our scope also includes a comparison to leading practices is to address some of those more subjective areas of strength and opportunity. And that's also one reason why Larry asked us to interview a number of members of leadership to really get some candid and transparent opportunities for improvement. And so around those, there's four that were relayed more consistently than others. And the first area is really around the proficiency of staff in conducting internal audits. Again, we want to distinguish internal audits from the employer audits as a separate category. And specifically what we heard is that management believes that there would be an increase in the quality, the process of internal audits in a couple areas, focusing on the highest risk areas. And I want to clarify that because we just talked about risk assessment as being a strength. And where we think the opportunity comes is taking the high-level risk assessment and how certain processes and systems come in scope on the audit plan to the very detailed objectives and risk areas that particular internal audits focus on. The other area that's related to this, but we felt it was important enough and came up consistently enough to mention, was communication really during, this is really of the audit teams during the planning, the field work, and the reporting process of individual audits. And what we heard pretty consistently was a desire from management to actually have more interaction with the internal audits, with the audit teams themselves during the planning to help align those specific risk areas more closely, during field work, and during development of the reports. The third area, and we've talked a little bit about this, the risk assessment, is really to better align the individual audits, those very detailed specific objectives, scope areas, testing procedures around the highest risk areas. And while it's important for internal audit to do an assessment and be independent in how they address risk, we heard management say that there's an opportunity to add additional risks or include risks that matter most to them. And they thought that could improve the quality, the impact, the value that internal audit brings to the organization. The last area around data analytics is something that's very typical right now, but we wanted to bring that up as an opportunity, is the area of data analytics, which allows audit processes to expand coverage in a number of areas and include sample sizes or even test, populations of information. That's often one of the key obstacles for doing that is actually usually the IT infrastructure platform. We understand that as CalSTRS continues to improve and enhance and implement new systems, that's an area of opportunity. It's probably more, for a lot of internal audit functions, it's an aspirational view. It's something that's always evolving. And so that's one of the areas we want to bring up as CalSTRS implements new systems. There's definitely an opportunity to expand use of data analytics, especially on the internal audit side. I want to open up for Frank. That concludes the part of that key.
Great, thank you very much. Thank
questions.
you. Yes, do we have questions from the committee? Lynn.
Thank you for the report. I thought it was very informative. And I was just curious, when you talk about the need for better communication with the audit staff and then management and the divisions that are being audited, how do you maintain the independence but make it useful enough or more useful for the actual divisions? So I just thought that there was kind of a tension between the independence factor and the silo factor.
You definitely want, ideally, a healthy tension between management. If there's not that healthy tension, then something's probably not right. But what this is really meant to get at is, while they have, while it's important for audit services, you're right, to maintain independence and come up with their own set of how they view risk and what they need to include. What we heard management say is they'd like to have more dialogue at the beginning to make sure that there's an understanding of what audit service is looking at, but also a chance to provide their own, more input and more feedback into risk areas. What came out of the interviews is that management very much is supportive of the process of audit services and the fresh set of eyes and that objective view, but that they would actually like more input into some of the risk areas because they view this as it could be a valuable tool to provide feedback on their processes from an outside view.
It didn't get the sense that it was to restrict what occurred, but to increase.
To expand the scope. Yes. Okay, thank you.
So I have a couple of questions. The last slide up there, for example, most of these are phrased in the format of the stakeholders indicated or the stakeholders indicated. In all cases, the stakeholders indicated. So when the stakeholders said that they thought that audit proficiency could be improved, do you agree, or are you just reporting what the stakeholders said?
No, I think we believe the same. One of the differences between the information we get from stakeholders is that more subjective input, it's information that isn't expected to be or wouldn't be documented, say, in a planning memo or work paper. So it's information that comes out, but through our discussion and understanding of the comments and dialogue with management.
And our review of the
agree.
working papers, the documentation, and discussions with audit services themselves, nothing indicated that that feedback through the interviews with the stakeholders was invalid.
Okay, so you think that proficiency could be improved, communication could be improved, and risk assessment within internal audits could
Yes.
be improved, all to the benefit of the internal audit function?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Bob, do you have anything to say? I thought you would. Good. I don't see anybody else from the committee who.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So ARM 28, if I could direct the board's attention to, it lists key strengths and key opportunities. And Ms. Sylvester, I just wanted to read one of the key opportunities, and I'll just read it here. It says, with respect to the structure, stakeholders have a positive view of the chief auditor and the overall role of audit services in CalSTR's governance structure. That's really good news. And if it didn't say that, that'd be scary. So, as you know, the committee's worked very hard to be engaged in the audit process throughout the audits that go on at the organization. The committee prides itself on being engaged with a topic which is usually relegated to something less interesting. I don't know what's more interesting than the audits, but I'm told that there are things. And then the competency of the chief auditor, I would concur in my end. You didn't interview me, and I didn't want you to. But I would concur with your assessment. I think there's a lot of talent at the top, and that's really good news because, in my opinion, the second part of your comment is going to have to rely on that talent to develop the competencies of the auditors that are on the staff. And so, Larry, you got your work cut out for you. So you're not just a chief auditor; you're also a developer of talent, and so you're going to have to dig deep and find those skills within yourself and work to develop. This seems to be an issue of development of personnel talents, and which is not beyond. We're human beings. We can all learn how to do things better with the right training, and I think that's what this points us towards. But I'm comforted that there's an active board, there's a talented CFO, a talented chief auditor, and an engaged CEO who knows these issues well. And so they don't particularly concern me, the findings that you found, but I think they are a call towards staff development. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Larry.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to comment, yeah.
Yes, please.
So, first of all, none of this is a surprise to me. And I think that, I don't want to lose the fact that the last QAR in 2011, this demonstrates that the Office of Audit Services has made significant strides to where we are today. The generally conforms rating that we received is actually the highest of the ratings that they can issue. There's a non-conformance, a partial conformance, and then a generally conformance opinion that they can do. So that's an improvement as well, and I think that's great. I appreciate the fact because this is really about who audits the auditor, right? And so I know that feeling, and even though it's a rare thing once every 5 years like this that we get audited basically. And so it presents some opportunities here from contrary to what we saw in the last QAR, which was really some foundational type of issues that have now been put in place. And the audit shop is in conformance with the standards, and now we have an opportunity to really grow and mature the organization. So risk-based auditing that they're referring to here, while I think there's been some great improvements in our overall approach to developing the audit plan, risk-based auditing is fairly new in the industry, and it's new to CalSTRS. It's something that we've just introduced in the last couple of years, and we brought in the Institute of Internal Auditors actually to do some training. It's something that we need to continue to train on and develop. As far as enhancing communications, it's a great opportunity for us to look at our processes and implement, you know, touch points, if you will, where we can get that input from staff. And usually what happens when we first implement this risk-based audit approach is we're taking the top level risks of the organization. And what I'm seeing is the day-to-day management who's down in the trenches are facing different operational risks maybe than what are considered at the strategic level when we're developing our plan. And so providing that input to us would be great. And so I think that the findings or the opportunities that are listed here will be good. There's things that we can work on and improve, and so I appreciate the thoroughness of the review that was conducted by KPMG. We concur with these opportunities here, and you know, we'll continue to develop some strategies and revise some processes and things like that we can really work with to try to further develop and mature the audit process and the business acumen of all of us that within audit services. And quite frankly, that's you know, one of the reasons why I'm here. And so I'm looking forward to that opportunity.
Any other comments from Bob? And let me go to Harry first then.
I heard pretty clearly Dr. Yetman's emphasis on the importance of building the bench, and it's great when you have a you know, all-star, a Hall of Fame quarterback, but you really need to build out the team. So I don't know, Mr. Chairman, whether or not how often or at what level we should be informed as to the progress that's being made in that area. I don't know if it comes down to it, comes to us at that point, but I clearly heard the emphasis there that there's an opportunity to do that, and wanted to know whether or not do we monitor that, or do we get a report back on how the progress being made in that area?
Larry?
Yeah, so what my intent is to develop a strategy around that with regards to continuous training, and there are tools that we have used that assess staff capabilities, and we have kind of a benchmark now that is a very detailed tool that we use, and then we can include in our annual report to you areas I think of significant progress. So for example, I think they point out in here that we have, you know, a few staff who are certified. And it's something that we want to encourage professional development and certification. And so we will continue to report to you progress in that area, for example. And I can just include that as part of our annual report to you.
It's sort of as a follow-up, I mean, and this is a question for our friends from KPMG, noting some proficiency deficiencies in the staff, does that translate into the quality of the audits, or do you have an opinion as to whether the leadership and the controls and the process that goes on in internal audits ensures that the audits that are done are high quality audits?
The audits aren't incorrect or flawed necessarily. There are opportunities with improved proficiency that they could be more efficient, right? And therefore you could get more work done in the course of your audit period. You could cover a greater, like we talked about earlier, where some of the staff were saying that you could cover more. You could increase the amount that you cover in terms of the risks that you identify and the testing that you perform. I think the proficiency leads to just an improvement. The lack of it doesn't necessarily identify that the quality of what's been done is poor, if that makes sense. And we did not audit to the extent to be able to tell you, we didn't identify anything that says, oh, this audit is wrong, right? This is a flawed audit.
I think, the one other, Harry, are you?
I'm finished, thanks.
Okay, I think the one other thing I would note is your your point 3 up here about, making sure that we're I think really looking at the right things. That's partly our responsibility here on the committee, that we approve the annual audit plan. I think we should make sure we're engaged, Larry, with you to question whether we're auditing the most important things, and how that selection process has led to the audit plan. But I think Harry's point is a good one. I think generally this is a very good report, and it's a very good report, Larry, on the leadership of the internal audits, which is great to get that confirmed. I think we've all been very pleased with the work that you've done, but obviously there are issues that need to be addressed, and we should probably be informed of progress, so that the next time there's a KPMG or somebody else comes in and does this audit, that we even get higher marks. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your work. I don't see that there's any other questions. Okay, great, good. Thank you very much. Thank you. So now we go to the Chief Auditor update. Larry?
Well, we reviewed a lot. We're kicking off our new plan. We already have 12 employer audits complete. We've got another 28 that are in progress, and internal audits is working on contract issuance and management, the separation process, and we're focusing also on the risk of cloud computing within the organization. There was an interest by the committee with regards to charter schools that we spoke at our last meeting, and we have 5 audits underway of charter schools right now, and we'll be coming to the committee with if we identify any results or trends as a result of those audits, specifically focused on charter schools. And that concludes my report, and happy to answer any questions.
I don't see that there are any, so thank you. So number 10, review of information requests. Roland, are there any?
Yes, Chairperson William Steele. I had 2. One of them had to do with the request to provide additional information to the committee with regards to identifiable risks and recommendations to address them. And the recent discussion with Mr. Keeley's point regarding monitoring and providing progress reports regarding staff.
Okay, great, thank you. So then the next is a draft of the agenda for the next committee meeting. Any comments, questions about that? Yes, Brian.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a suggestion under information item
Yes.
to include compliance program update as an item. We have the chief auditor update, but I think it's a good place for us to do our compliance update to the committee with your permission.
So add that to our agenda then for the next meeting?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think that is a good idea. Good idea. Okay. So opportunity for statements from the public. I don't see anybody at the microphone, so I think we are done. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. We will, according to Dana, we will come back for compensation committee at 11 o'clock. So it gives us almost 10 minutes.